Hey, what's up? It's Jared with Ditch Auto. Today we're going to talk about the 10 settings that you need to change on your Canon EOS R. These are things that I changed because I wanted to kind of customize the functionality and make it just work a little bit better for my workflow. Now, not only do I create these videos, but I like to kind of consume other videos where people talk about their settings because I like to see what works best for some people and learn maybe a better way for myself. So that's why I make these videos as well. So we're going to dive right into 10 settings that I changed on this camera that customized it to just be better for my workflow. We're going to start with two bonus items that are kind of a given, but they're things that I like to mention at the beginning of the video. You know, when you get a new camera, it's super exciting to go out and shoot, but I highly recommend that you set the date and time on your camera. Set the date and time, and if you live in an area where you have to adjust the time zone or adjust the daylight savings from time to time, make sure that you update those, because when you share your images, that time information is written to the image, and of course when you go back to like view your images in some sort of order, they're not going to be in order anymore, and it's going to be rather frustrating. So set that date and time. And then the other item is actually to set the Wi-Fi information on the camera, get that set up and configured so that you can connect to your smartphone and transfer images from your camera to your smartphone. It's pretty simple to set up, and once you have the app installed on your iPhone or your Android phone, it makes it really easy for you to move images wirelessly from your camera over to your device so that you can edit them on that device and share them to your social networks and all that good stuff. All right, so we're going to dive right in. We're going to start at the left side of the menu and go through the settings that I changed. Some of them I changed right away because it's a common practice for me to update these settings. Other settings are things that I just really came to change after spending a little bit of time with the camera. All right, so the first thing that I do is go and set the camera to shoot in RAW plus JPEG. Now, these days, and even though image files are getting larger, we have a lot of memory. I have a 64 gigabyte card in here, and I could shoot quite a few full RAW and JPEG images. Now, the reason that I would shoot RAW plus JPEG is because the raw images are going to give me the most editable image that I can pull back detail if I messed up on my exposure. If the white balance wasn't that good, something went a little wonky when I took the picture, I can make that adjustment. It gives me a lot more detail and information for even black and white conversions, believe it or not. So having the raw file available is all around just a better option, and so I always enable raw shooting. And there are actually two raw options in here. One of them is a compressed RAW, and one of them is a full RAW image. So depending on whether or not you think you'll use them, maybe you don't even need the uncompressed RAW image. You could actually go with the compressed RAW image, which is almost going to double the capacity of your SD card. So it depends. I like to shoot uncompressed so that I just have as much image to work with as possible, and if I need to apply noise reduction or anything like that, I just have a lot more left there, a lot more detail in the image to be able to do that work. And then of course the JPEG, because when I'm copying images over from my camera to my smartphone, that JPEG image is going to be smaller, it's going to transfer much faster. I can edit that image for social media, which social media images are lower resolution, so the JPEG, it's fine to edit that and share that. And another reason to shoot JPEG plus RAW is just to have a backup. You know, this camera doesn't have a dual card slot, so having that backup means that if some of your RAW images got corrupt, which that happens, you have the JPEG images to fall back on. Of course, if your card goes bad or something happens with your card, you're out of luck, but at least you have two different file types on there just in case. I've actually had RAW files go corrupt before and been thankful that I had the JPEG images there as backups. Number two is to disable the touch shutter on the back of the screen. Now, I know that there's an option to just go ahead and disable that from the back of the screen, but I like to just disable it flat out altogether so that I can't accidentally re-enable it. I use the back of the touchscreen for a lot of other things, and I'll talk about that in the next thing that I change, but the touch screen operation for enabling the shutter really isn't that useful for me. I do tend to use it maybe when I'm shooting like real estate photos where I have the camera on a tripod, I'm not looking through the EVF, I'm using the back of the screen, and I just want to really gently tap the back of the screen to take a photo. But I mean, most of the time I would actually prefer to set a small delay on shooting where I could press the shutter button, back away from the camera, and then not not have the camera shake or change or move, because I want that consistent image when I'm shooting like HDR photos or bracketed photos. But nonetheless, the touch shutter, I've just never really liked that on any camera, and I always disable it because it never fails. I'll accidentally touch the back of the screen and it will enable a shot, and I take a photo, and it's just annoying. And I feel maybe a little embarrassed. I don't know. It's just really kind of obnoxious when that happens, so I just disable it flat out. Now, number 3 is changing the AF operation from single shot to AI servo. Now, I've always done this on all of my Canon cameras all the way back to when I first got started shooting on Canon. Even though I shoot on Sony now, whenever I shoot on a Canon, I go back and change that to servo AF. The main reason that I do that is because I want the autofocus to be continuous when I have my finger on the AF on button on the back. The single shot functionality is really good if you want to press down the shutter and have your autofocus stop and just stay in that position until you press down the shutter again. And maybe it also might work even if you are doing back button focus, where you're not enabling your autofocus with pressing down the shutter part way, but actually using the AF on button on the back of the camera. There isn't a good reason to use single shot, but most of the time, for most of the things that I'm shooting, I want that AI servo turned on, or that servo autofocus. Used to be called AI servo, now it's really just called servo autofocus. I want that autofocus to be kind of continual as long as I have my thumb on that AF on button. There isn't as much of a reason anymore, considering that I'm shooting back button focus and the operation of these mirrorless cameras is a little bit different than the traditional DSLR, but with that servo AF on, it gives me a little bit more of what I was used to when I was shooting with the DSLR. Number 4 is that I changed the autofocus point to single point, and there's a lot of different autofocus options on here, like face tracking, IAF, expanded area, expanded AF area around, zone AF, vertical, horizontal, but I found that 1-point AF works the best. And what that basically means is that instead of letting the camera decide by using anything that the sensor can see to choose the autofocus point, I'm telling it only to use the 1 point that I then move around the screen manually. Now, this sounds kind of like a tedious thing, like why would I do that when these cameras are getting so good with autofocus? And that basically disables eye autofocus, because eye autofocus is going to need the camera to see pretty much everything so it can determine if it's going to lock onto an eye or not. Now, for me, I've had it miss so many times, not only on this camera, but pretty much every camera. So it's not a knock on Canon EOS R or on Nikon or Sony. IAF is kind of a new thing, and it's really hard for the camera to determine whose eye it should lock onto. And yes, on some cameras you can choose left or right eye, but my goodness, those are so many things that you have to really deal with and figure out and switch back and forth between, that it's just easier for me to move my autofocus point around manually and put it right where I want it. When I'm approaching a shot that I want to take, I know where I want that autofocus point to be, and I get it in and around the right spot right before I get ready to take the shot, and then I can use the pad on the back to just kind of move that around a little bit to fine tune it. And I've gotten so good at that that I do it really quick, and it's a much better process, and I almost never miss focus because of that. When I leave it up to the camera, by leaving it in like a face tracking or an expanded area type of tracking for autofocus, it never fails. The camera decides something is more interesting in the background, I miss the point of interest that I wanted, and I have to take the shot over again, waste time seeing, oh, that shot's out of focus, or maybe worst case scenario, not even noticing that that shot was maybe a little bit out of focus because it chose the wrong thing. So putting it on that 1-point autofocus is something that I started doing a long time ago, and it's something that I will continue to do forever until these cameras can read my brain and see exactly what I see. Number 5 is enabling touch autofocus on the back of the screen. So you go into the touch and drag autofocus settings and enable touch and drag autofocus. Now for me, because I'm right-handed, which means I'm, using this hand on the right hand of the camera here and using my left hand here and not holding the camera with my thumb towards the back of the camera, I want the right hand side of the screen to be the active touch area. And that works out pretty good for me considering the way that I hold the camera. I can kind of get my thumb in there on the back of the screen and move that autofocus point around. Now in the last step I talked about using that 1-point autofocus and moving that single point around the screen. I can do that by utilizing the pad on the back here, moving it left, right, up, and down, but there's also an option here to enable the touch drag and actually use the right half of the screen to move my thumb around. This is something that we saw on Sony cameras a little while ago, and Canon brought it to their mirrorless cameras, and it's an excellent feature. It makes moving that focus point around really easy, being able to kind of use the back of your camera like a trackpad on a laptop to move the cursor around, which your autofocus point, moving it around. It just makes for a nice experience. Sometimes I do that. Other times I still end up using the pad on the back, but I like having that feature enabled and set up so that it's ready to go. Jumping over a few panels in the settings menu, I want you to disable beep. Everybody should disable beep. It's something that I do on all of my cameras. I don't like the camera beeping and making noise when I'm taking pictures. One of the things that the beep does, not only does it annoy me because I turn off the beep on my cell phone, I don't like my phones, I don't like anything making beeps and distracting me, but with your camera, when your camera is beeping, like when it beeps when it achieves focus and makes other beeps, the person you're taking a photo of kind of becomes maybe a little self-conscious because they're knowing what you're doing. And of course the shutter is going to make noise and stuff like that. But if the camera is continuously beeping, it's also distracting the subject that you're taking photos of. So I found it best just to turn off that beep altogether, and then when I'm achieving autofocus and it actually locks on, there's no beep, there's no beeps, there's really no reason that your camera needs to beep at all. I just turn it off completely, and I encourage you to do the same. Number 7 is to set your copyright information in the back of the camera. This is going to automatically write a copyright to your images so that there is text in the image file itself in the EXIF data, so that way you have protection against your photos being used. Now, if you take a photo and put it out there in the world without any copyright data in that image, there's no way of proving that the image is yours. Of course, there's ways to strip the copyright data from an image altogether by taking it into Photoshop and removing that information and saving it out as a JPEG, but having that copyright information in there is going to help protect your images from being stolen. If you upload them to the web and somebody uses them on their website, chances are a person that's doing that is not paying attention to stripping copyright information out of an image, and you'll have a much better job of getting that image taken down or getting a request at least for it to be used by having your copyright information in that image. And if somebody does get access to one of your images and there's no copyright information in there, then they can say, well, I didn't know I couldn't use this image because there was no copyright. So I recommend adding your name or your photography name or whatever you want to put in there that identifies with you or your business, and then also just putting all rights reserved, or if you want to use some sort of a Creative Commons license, you could put that in there as well. Something that's going to let the person know that comes across your image that there are certain limitations to using your work. I also think this is important just for the average person, even if you're not a pro photographer, because I've found images that I've taken of my kids that I had on my social media on websites where somebody used them on a website, and I was able to get that image taken down really quickly because I just said it is a copywritten image and you don't have permission. I didn't even have to argue the fact that it's my kids or this or that. I just flat out said I have a copyright on that image and you can't use it. Number 8 is one of my favorite things about this camera and lens platform, and that is the ability to set the custom ring on your lens to do something like adjust your ISO. Now on a zoom lens for this platform, you're going to have 3 rings. One is for zoom, one is for focus, and one is custom. On your prime lenses, you're just going to have 2 rings. One of them is for your focus and the other one is custom. And so you can set that custom ring to do a couple of different things. I set it to adjust ISO because there is no really easy way to adjust ISO on the camera without remapping a few things or using the touch functionality on the back. And so I utilize the ring to adjust my ISO. And I've talked about this in other videos on this camera, so I'm not going to go super deep into it, but you can customize this basically to do a couple of different things, such as increase or decrease your shutter speed or aperture, your exposure compensation, or your ISO, and that is essentially what I do, is set it to the ISO because I think that makes the most sense for the way that I shoot. So number 9 is customizing the multifunction kind of slide bar on the back of the camera. This is something new that Canon brought to this camera, and I kind of have like a love-hate relationship with it, but I've customized it so that when I'm shooting video, I can adjust the audio. Now you can't adjust the audio levels while you're shooting video. You have to stop recording and then you can adjust the audio levels, but I found that to be kind of the best use for me. And then of course in playback mode, I can use it to swipe through my images, and I can also tap to lock an image so that I don't accidentally delete it, and I can also tap on the other side of it to rate an image. And so that's kind of a good feature. What I don't like about it is that you can't customize the functionality of it for shooting photos, and then when you're in video mode, customize it, because really I only need the audio level settings for when I'm shooting video, but you can only set it to one thing, and so I choose that as opposed to choosing something that is photo specific, because I can't really think of anything that I can use that for other than adjusting ISO, and I've set this to adjust ISO on the front of the camera. So for me, the multifunction bar is somewhat useful, but still like kind of limiting. I hope that they change something in the firmware that separates that so that I can use audio levels for video shooting and maybe another functionality for photo shooting. Now number 10 is that I set up this camera for back button focus shooting. That means that I disable the shutter from doing any form of focusing, and the reason that I do this is because a lot of times I am shooting in a situation where I'm waiting for a moment to happen. I shoot a lot of weddings and conferences and stuff like that, and I may be waiting for a specific action to happen. At a conference, I'm waiting for a person to look up from behind their laptop and look engaged in what's taking place. And so I may have my camera ready and I'm focused on that person and I'm waiting for that opportunity to happen. And then, of course, you press down the shutter button and the camera does a little bit of focus searching, especially in lower light situations, and you might lose your opportunity. If I disable the shutter from initiating focus, then I can hold down that button partially. It's not doing anything other than waiting for me to take a shot. And if I do need to activate autofocus, there's an AF on button right on the back of the camera. I would rather utilize the back button to focus and the shutter button simply for taking a picture. And of course, you can set it so that when you press down the shutter button a little bit, the camera starts to meter so that you can work on getting your exposure correct. That's definitely good, and I like that, although it kind of does that on its own anyways. I could press that down a little bit, metering starts, and I can meter and work on my exposure, and then when I need to activate autofocus, even if I have that shutter button pressed down a little bit, and I press down the AF button on the back, I can enable AF and start that autofocus process. So I like that better because that doesn't give the camera any reason to do anything when all I really want it to do is take a picture. These cameras are getting way better, and I feel like these days there's less of a reason to have back button focus activated only. But I still, out of practice, like to have it that way, and if I miss a shot, it's on me, not because the camera was busy autofocusing. So that's going to do it for my 10 settings to change on the Canon EOS R. I hope some of these you found useful. Of course, your shooting style may vary, and so some of these settings may not mesh really well with the way that you shoot, with your style, so make sure to customize them. But I think the idea is just getting people in the mode of getting into their camera and customizing it. You know, my whole concept here is ditch auto. Don't just get your camera out of the box, put it in auto mode and start shooting. Customize the settings, learn what the settings do, and make it a better shooting experience for yourself, because that is going to result in you getting better photos out of your camera. If you want to learn more about shooting in manual mode, definitely check out my free course titled Ditch Auto, Unlock Manual Photography, down in the description below. It's a free course and I'd love for you to check it out. But that's going to do it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching. Click on that thumbs up if you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. And I hope to see you back here soon in the next one.